If I wanted to grow a B2B SaaS in 2024, I'd use this marketing strategy because there's a shift happening in SaaS marketing. Cold outbound is getting less effective, inboxes are getting more crowded. So, how do you stand out and actually generate product demand? Today, I'll show you the framework I'd use to make it happen. Now, the framework I'm talking about here is founder led content. And what this means is using social content on LinkedIn and X to turn your founder or someone in your C suite into the go to resource for your ICP or ideal customer profile. And this strategy works whether you're early stage or you're bootstrap, you just raise a round of funding, or if you're a more mature company. We're even seeing really big players like Airbnb and Brian Chesky or OpenAI and Sam Altman use this sort of strategy when launching products and running their social content. Now, why does founder-led social content actually work so well? And there's two components we need to consider here. One is the founder-led part, and the other is the social part. On the founder-led piece, people want to buy from people and they want to consume content from other people. Think about your own content consumption behavior. I'd be willing to bet that if you go to your YouTube history, you go to your Twitter timeline, or even your LinkedIn timeline, the people that you're consuming content from the most and actually engaging with are other people. You're not really doing this with corporate accounts. And if you do happen to be consuming content from a corporate account or an organization, it's probably one that's been well established and has that brand recognition already. So if you're starting off as an early stage company, your customers are kind of going to tune you out if you're posting from a faceless brand account with no other founder led or team led presence built around that. And we're seeing this within consumer and B2B. So on the consumer side, brands like Represent and George Heaton or Nick Bear with BPN are all tapping into this founder led content to create momentum on social platforms. And the platforms themselves reward this behavior. If you look on the LinkedIn timeline, again, go scroll right now. I'd be willing to bet that one out of maybe every 6 or 7 posts is a company page. And a lot of times the company pages that are surfacing on the timeline on LinkedIn are promoted. So that organic content that's getting distributed is largely coming through personal accounts. So again, if you're starting from scratch and you're posting from a company page, you're essentially posting into the void if you have no other means of amplifying that. Now, that's why it makes sense to go founder-led versus company-led content. What about the social piece? This is another component that you need to consider if you're really trying to grow your SaaS in 2024. A lot of times, content marketing, or what most people think of as content marketing, is like SEO and blog articles. And this can work, and it's a viable part of your marketing strategy. But if you're starting from scratch, you're early stage trying to gain momentum, or again, even if you're late stage or more mature and you're really just trying to maximize visibility, a lot of times SEO isn't the best way to go because social platforms make it easier to get distribution at a faster rate. It still takes time to build a content presence on a platform like LinkedIn or X, but you can reasonably go from starting to post to getting momentum on platform and starting to get leads coming in a lot more quickly than you can just by posting blog articles that aren't going to get a whole lot of distribution and just end up going to die somewhere in a random corner of your site. And whenever I'm looking at marketing strategies to recommend to my clients or for myself, I'm always looking for what's going to get us the most bang for our buck. What's going to get us the most results or the best outcome for the least amount of effort or lift in terms of time, resources, personnel. And when you compare all these different marketing motions, again, doing content right still takes plenty of work, but that work is actually going to get you distribution versus putting all of that work into a blog article that, again, goes and lives somewhere on your site, or putting all that work into a case study that's fantastic, but you're not getting it any distribution. Okay, so now you understand why founder-led social content is the move in 2024 if you're trying to grow a SaaS. How do you actually do it though? There's a few different levers that you can pull. One would be cashing in on credibility. A lot of times when you're building a company, you were your own ICP at some point. So an example of this is if you're building a SaaS for B2B salespeople and you were previously a VP of sales at a super fast growing tech startup, well, you already have built-in credibility with your target audience. So you can tap into that with your social content. And one, they're going to pay more attention. This goes back to what we were talking about earlier with personal accounts getting more distribution. One of the things I didn't mention, which plays into this, is if you already have credibility with your target audience, that is also going to increase your distribution because two people could say the same thing, but if one has relevant experience and one is a brand new person in that space, the one with relevant experience and that social proof is going to get a lot better content performance and distribution. One of the ways that you can build a founder-led content engine on social is by cashing in on that credibility that you've built with your ICPs. So again, one example would be that SaaS geared towards B2B salespeople, and the founder is a former VP of sales at a super hot startup. Another example could be if you're selling a SaaS for e-commerce founders and you yourself were an e-commerce founder that scaled a brand to 8 figures or scaled to an exit at some point. That is inherent credibility that you could use to build your audience. And those experiences, those stories will serve as the source material for a good amount of your social content for this new venture. So you can take that experience and parlay it into this founder-led content motion. Now, not every founder has this luxury. So if you're a first-time founder and you're sort of starting from scratch, how do you actually do this? Of course, having that credibility to lean on is super helpful, but not every founder has this luxury. So if you're more starting from scratch, or if you're a first-time founder, or you have experience, but it's not super relevant to the ICP you're selling to now. So for example, if you're selling a SaaS for e-commerce founders, but you don't have that experience in e-com, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to go super in depth on like e-commerce thought leadership. It's like, how do you actually use founder-led content when you don't have that experience? This could be a whole video in and of itself, but at a high level, this is where documenting and sort of sharing what you learn or sharing what you're building as you go, or that building in public idea, tends to work pretty well. So using myself as an example, I know I'm not building a SaaS right now, but it sort of applies with the agency as well. If I was talking about B2B social content, I can speak from a point of view of an expert on that. So I can just tell you like experience from running a social motion at Triple Whale or running social content for the clients we work with now. I can speak from a position of expertise there. If I'm talking about building an agency, I mean, we're about a year in, so I've learned a thing or two, but it's still so early. So if I was talking in a very authoritative manner, I'm like, here's how you build an agency, I don't know what I'm talking about still. I'm still figuring it out. That would be where something like documenting would be more helpful. Now, for me, I'm trying to build an audience mostly around B2B content. So I lean more into like the content thought leadership. But if for whatever reason I was building a product for agency owners, then I might lean more into sharing like how I'm building the agency or documenting that process. Another wrinkle to consider here is if your founder just isn't wanting to do content, or if you're a founder watching this and you're like, dude, I don't really have the experience, or I don't really want to do this, I would, one, urge you to reconsider. But two, if that's really the case, you might have someone on your team who does have that relevant experience. So maybe you're a CEO and you're selling that SaaS product for e-commerce founders, but you don't have that relevant experience, but your CMO does. Maybe your CMO is like the figurehead of the brand on social. That has its own risk, because if the CMO leaves or if your employee leaves, then a big part of your audience goes with them. So that's, again, a topic for a different video. It is something that you can consider if you want to lean into this sort of personal branding or personality-based content. Okay, so now how do you measure this, and what can you actually expect when you roll out a founder-led social content strategy? Early on, what I would recommend is focusing on performance on the platform. This is where most companies go wrong, especially in B2B and especially in SaaS, because a lot of these marketers and executives are more like traditional and they want to see everything in a very quantitative manner. They want exact data to support how many leads are coming in through social, and the exact ROI. Attribution is such a black box, and it's especially true when it comes to organic social. And what I would recommend, you can take this or you can leave it, whatever you want, but what I would recommend, if you want to use social in the most effective way possible, focus most on building an engaged audience on the platform you're posting on in the first 90 days. Really, the longer you can extend this time horizon of, hey, I'm just going to focus on becoming the go-to expert for my audience in this niche versus I need to drive sales and leads right now. The longer you can extend that time horizon, the more effective your content motion is going to be. So what I would focus on are your impressions trending up month over month? Is your engagement rate in a healthy spot? Is your follower count going up, both in the absolute sense, but also your rate of follower growth? How fast is your audience growing? Those are the things that I would optimize for early. And that's not to say that you're not going to sell your product or you're not going to generate demand for your product, but I would really urge you to be patient with this and give the content motion time to compound. Now, as you gain momentum on these platforms, even if you don't go super hard with the calls to action and really shilling your product, you're going to start to see leads come in. You're going to start to see business results come out of just being a thought leader in your space. So what does that actually look like? There's a few things you want to keep track of. One, like one of the more obvious ones, inbound DMs. Are people reaching out to you via DMs to schedule a product demo, to learn more, even just inbound DMs to like network with you? Are more of those happening? The next one I would say, attributed leads from LinkedIn or Twitter. Obviously, as you grow your audience, the end goal here is not to make you a celebrity. The end goal is to generate product demand. At some point, you have to be getting an actual ROI on this. So are leads coming in from LinkedIn or Twitter? You can keep track of this just using self-reported attribution, whether it's a post-purchase survey, if you're self-serve or on a sales call, just get a sense of like where they found you. And you should hear more and more people say, oh, I saw the founder's content on LinkedIn, or oh, I saw the founder's content on Twitter. Another interesting metric is win rate, where the prospect has consumed content on LinkedIn or Twitter. A little bit harder to track, but if you can get a sense of this, it's super helpful to see that, hey, maybe this person didn't come in or book a demo through the link in your Twitter bio, but they've consumed your Twitter content or your LinkedIn content, and that influenced the outcome of the deal. And then, like I was mentioning earlier, cold outbound is just getting less effective. The inboxes are very crowded, both in email and especially on LinkedIn. Like LinkedIn inboxes are a complete war zone, and it's very difficult to stand out or just break through the noise because people have just tuned out cold DMs so hard. One way to make cold outbound more effective is to have that founder-led social content, because what happens is, especially if you're reaching out as the founder, if people have seen your content, they're going to be more likely to reply because you're not just this random person. They've seen you, they've engaged with you. And even if someone from your team, so if an SDR reaches out on your company's behalf, even if it's not you as the founder, if they recognize the company name because they've seen your content, it's pretty reasonable to assume that that reply rate is going to be higher. So this founder-led content makes all of your other marketing motions easier. Same goes for paid media. If you're running paid media, if you're relying on that alone, that gets very difficult. But if you have a organic content motion in place alongside that, it can improve the performance of your paid media. Same goes with in-person events. So one of my clients a while back, he grew his audience on LinkedIn. And one of the things he reported was that at these industry events, these dinners, these trade shows, he was getting recognized more and more, almost like a celebrity. So that's how I think about looking at whether or not this founder-led content motion is working and what you can expect. As far as the timeline, it's hard to tell. I'm not going to give you a set timeline here, but I would recommend at least testing this motion for 90 days. By 90 days in, you should see momentum both in terms of the social metrics we talked about, like the impressions, follower growth, all that stuff, and you should see progress on the business front, at least a few leads starting to come in. If you're not seeing anything, it's probably a sign that you're not doing things right. So let me know if you have any questions on that in the comments. Okay, so now I'm going to walk you through the actual playbook to execute this. So the content frameworks that perform the best, the content platforms to post on that are going to give you the biggest bang for your buck, and all the things to consider when you're actually rolling this out. But before we go ahead and do that, if you're enjoying this video, drop a like down below. I'm new on YouTube, so it helps. I'll take anything I can get in the algorithm. And also, if you're loving this, I'd appreciate you dropping a subscribe as well, because I post these videos at least once a week, going more in depth on B2B social strategy and just showing you how to generate product demand using content. Okay, now as far as the playbook, it's pretty simple. I'm not gonna go too crazy here. You don't need to go too crazy either. It's very straightforward. So first things first, pick your platforms. Answer here is obvious. LinkedIn is the clear number one choice for B2B. It's where your ICP most likely hangs out, and they're in the state of mind to consume business related content. So it's just easier to sell and build a very relevant audience on that platform. I would also say Twitter should be in the mix. So LinkedIn and Twitter are the two social platforms that I would recommend. Instagram can work. I mean, a short form video is working well, but I just wouldn't put your time there until you've cracked LinkedIn, until you've cracked Twitter. Now, as far as cadence or how often you post, also pretty straightforward. The golden rule here is post as often as you can without sacrificing quality. But I know you're watching this and you're like, okay, I get that, Tommy, but like, just tell me how often to post. What I would recommend is post daily on these platforms. So on LinkedIn, you can either go 5 times per week, so every day on weekdays, or 7 times per week, just every day in general. As you get more comfortable or as you have more resources behind your content production, you can up that to 10 to 14 times per week, so 1 to 2 times per day. I wouldn't go beyond 2 times per day on LinkedIn. That's a bit overkill. On Twitter, what I would do is about 10 times per week at a minimum. You can really take Twitter as far as you want. There's no upper limit on the amount of content that you can post per day. Now, if you're a founder running this on your own, there's a certain time limit that you have on the time that you can dedicate to social content. Or even if you're a marketer in-house at a company and you're running your founder's social content, you don't want to spend all day just ripping tweets. It's not super high leverage, and I would recommend just setting a limit there. So on Twitter, I'd go 1 to 2 times per day, maybe 3 if you have the resources or you want to be more aggressive with it. Or if you just see Twitter's working really well and you want to double down. As far as content frameworks and what type of content to post, this could be a whole course in and of itself, but I want to give you the top frameworks that I see work well right now. And if you just use these 5 or 6 types of posts and just rotate between them, that'll get you like 95% of the way there. So literally just copy paste this. The first type of post, very simple, listicle. So 5 tips to X, Y, or Z, like your typical listicle style post. People love lists. It's very easy to organize concepts and ideas. They tend to perform well, especially on LinkedIn and Twitter. Another type of format or just post concept is hot takes and polarizing opinions. One of the things that a lot of B2B founders get wrong on social is they're too safe, they're too tame. And you don't want to just do rage bait or get people worked up for no reason, but be a little spicy. Like give an opinion that most people might not agree with in your industry. That's one of the things that's going to separate you from your competitors or from other people that are posting your content. Like if you have a strong opinion on something, lean into it, especially if you have data to back it up. So have some sort of post around a hot take or polarizing opinion. Bonus points if it's on a trending topic, like a recent piece of news in the industry or recent development. You could do like a personal story that taps into some sort of hot take. That works really well. The third content framework is customer stories. Stories in general just work really well on LinkedIn and Twitter right now. It gets away from the generic Wikipedia style of content that has plagued the timeline in recent years. It puts you in a position where you're posting anecdotes and stories that only you can post. So one way to do that is customer stories. So if there's a recent win a customer had, or maybe a customer made a feature request and your team turned it around super quick, or maybe there's a story of a customer who was hesitant to sign on at some point, but they signed on and now they're loving your product. There are a million different ways to spin this, but customer stories are one of the most effective frameworks you can use in your social content. The fourth framework would be case studies, kind of similar to customer stories, but case studies is literally taking the case studies that live on your site, which likely exist. If those don't exist, you should get those made as well because they really help in the sales process. But you have case studies on your site, most likely is kind of stuck under the resources section. Go to that resources section, take those case studies, and each one of those can turn into a LinkedIn post or a piece of Twitter content. Now, the fifth framework I have for you is personal stories. So going back to the idea we were talking about earlier of like your credibility being a lever that you can pull in your social content. And one of the reasons why founder-led content works well for founders with experience relevant to their ICP is those stories from your time in that previous life that gave you that credibility can turn into content for you now. Again, if you're making a product for B2B salespeople and you were a VP of sales at a super hot tech startup, you can take those anecdotes and learnings from your experience in that VP of sales role and turn that into LinkedIn content. So maybe there was a time where you closed a very difficult deal, or you picked up a very specific strategy, or a mentor told you something. Each of those anecdotes can turn into personal story content for LinkedIn, for Twitter. And this by far is the most compelling type of content because, like I was saying, it's content that only you can post. Like Alex Hormozy has this idea of he only wants to post content that he can post, that no one else can duplicate. And yeah, those business breakdowns and third-party case studies can work, and we use them actually. I think they work quite well, but you don't want to rely on those because they're not unique to you. So lean into those personal stories, especially if you have the experience to back it up. And then the last framework I have, I just mentioned it right there, but these in niche breakdowns or third-party case studies, whatever you want to call them. But the idea is taking some sort of relevant piece of news or some sort of relevant figure or celebrity within your niche and doing a content piece on them. So the classic version of this is you'll see YouTube videos breaking down Mr. Beast's YouTube strategy. And the idea is pretty much like if you see Mr. Beast in a YouTube thumbnail, the YouTube audience is more likely to click. Even if Mr. Beast isn't the one making the video, they're more likely to click because they already know Mr. Beast, so they're borrowing Mr. Beast's credibility. You can do the same thing on LinkedIn by doing these business breakdowns or case studies on relevant topics within your niche or well-known companies, well-known people, current events. Another version of this is, again, taking an industry-specific news story. So say you have an AI startup. Like an example of this sort of trend jacking idea or this in-niche breakdown idea would be doing some sort of breakdown on OpenAI's recent Sora launch. The idea is essentially borrowing credibility from people or companies that your target audience is already very familiar with, and then inserting your own takes and opinions to build your own credibility with that audience. If you rotate between those 6 frameworks, like if you literally make a content calendar with listicle, hot take, customer story, case study, personal story, in niche breakdown, and just rotate through that week after week, 30 days in, 90 days in, I suspect you'll be in a pretty good spot. Now, one of the most common concerns I get on this stuff though is like, hey, this all sounds great, but I'm a founder, I'm a CEO. I just don't have the time to sit down and write this content or create this content. And you're in luck. I put together a video talking about how I put this entire thing on autopilot and get it to the point where you have your internal team essentially make the content for you, but it all still sounds very authentic and original, and it's still your takes. So I'll toss that video up on the screen right now. Go ahead and check that out. Let me know if you have any questions about the framework I just laid out here. And yeah, this is how I would build a SaaS marketing motion in 2024 using founder-led social content. So check out that next video. Hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you over there.